So today I'm going to talk a bit about my involvement with NASA and ESA, the European Space Agency, and the work that went into putting the exercise equipment that's currently in use on the International Space Station, as well as the training programs that the astronauts use. So that's my area of expertise. So humans, we've always been fascinated by space. I think the idea of what's out there and can we go out there? And it wasn't really until the 20th century until we even began to make any kind of steps towards space travel or space exploration. And in the 60s were the initial space missions. There's been movies, okay, I thought it was on, movies made about this. And in the 70s, those missions continued. Skylab, many of you may not have even heard of Skylab, but it was really a precursor to the International Space Station. And in the 80s, the Space Shuttle missions started, and they continued well into the 2000s. And it wasn't until 1998 that the International Space Station the construction on that actually began. And it's definitely still in use, and they continue to upgrade and maintain that. So with that, those initial steps, those initial space explorations, I think NASA really started realizing the effects of space travel, space exploration on the human body. And unfortunately, it wasn't all good. And so the problem was really gravity. And I think there was even a recent movie called Gravity. But people think that it's zero gravity, that the space environment is zero gravity, and it's really not. It is microgravity because the level of gravity is very low, and we use Earth's gravity as our reference point, and so that's why we say Earth's gravity is 1G. But if you look at the gravity on Mars, it's about 40% of that we experience here on Earth, and the moon is even lower. It's about 20%. So this is a problem, and I think the biggest problem is we realized what it was doing to the body, not only during space travel, but once someone returned to Earth and had to readjust to Earth's conditions. So this looks very scary. I know it's a very large list of all the negative things that happen to your body when you go into space. So this probably would put most people off of even considering going into space. But fortunately, most of these things return to normal very quickly upon return to Earth. And I'm going to really just focus on, too many things to hold here. I'm going to focus on the box in red, and I will go over what each of these things are because it's overlapped here a bit. But it's really, I'm focusing on the muscles and the bones. And what we see with space travel, living in space, such as on the International Space Station, we see a loss of muscle tissue. We see, and with that, a loss of muscle strength. And even more importantly, we see a loss of bone density and bone strength. And interestingly, this is very similar to what is seen in people as they age, if they don't train and don't continue to stress their muscles and bones. So a lot of the background information for study of what's going on with space exploration in terms of the muscles and bones came from research that was already being done and continues to be done here with the aging population. And so we realized very quickly that this had to be addressed. And the only way to keep muscles and bones healthy and functional is through exercise. So fortunately, astronauts had already been doing some exercise. And you can see here that they had been using rowing machines, cycle ergometers, and treadmills. So once people were spending some additional time in space, especially when the first space station cosmonauts and astronauts were there for any length of time, a few months, there were all kind of tests being done, and just to look at everything that was on that previous slide, but especially muscles and bones and their function and their structure. And we quickly realized that this type of exercise was not sufficient. So that posed a problem. So we had these devices, exercise devices, and they were great for the heart, they were great for the lungs, so just keeping the body fit in that sense, but not for the muscles and for the bones. So now we had a dilemma, because the only really known way to develop and just maintain muscle mass, bone density after adulthood is resistance training or weight training. And this has been shown in older people, it's been shown in athletes. So we knew this. But the problem was, how do you lift weights in space when everything's virtually weightless? So that was a pretty big dilemma. And it took quite a few teams of folks, and it took some interagency, international cooperation to get this all figured out. But the cosmonauts that had been on the Mir project, they had been spending quite a bit of time in space, and they were using elastic bands, similar to what you may have used a TheraBand, something, not exactly that, but very similar. And they had seen some decent results with maintenance of muscle, but not so much with bone. So the thought was, well, let's try to improve upon that. And so the first, I guess, version of the space weight training machine was this. It was called the Interim, because I think everyone realized that this was just the first step. The Interim Resistive Exercise Device, so the IRED. And it worked okay, and I'll show you the inside of the equipment here in a moment. But you can see that this gentleman is doing what appears to be a squat exercise. And so this machine was capable of performing, someone could perform about 26 different exercises on it. And the load was the equivalent of about 300 pounds, which sounds like a lot, but there were some problems. So this is the inside. So you can see what the engineers did. They took the elastic band idea and changed it. So they made it into a twisting configuration. So as the device was used, the bands rotated around that center core and got tighter and tighter and more difficult to move. So there's your resistance. That was good. The bad part was you have to untwist it and get it back to the starting position to be able to do another repetition on an exercise. In theory, that sounds all right, but the body's not set up that way. Some of your joints and your muscles work that way, where you are weakest at the start and strongest at the finish. One example would be a squat, getting up from a squat. But many other exercises don't work that way. For the example of an arm curl, you're weakest here, you're really strong here, and then you're weak again here. And so that was a problem, because as that device worked, it just got increasingly harder. So then there were some other exercises that are the opposite. So the problem was you were getting too much resistance at certain points and not enough resistance at other points. But having said all that, it was still better than nothing, or better than just the bands. And so this list is the exercises that could be done, and you can see that there are, most of the major muscle groups are covered, and in a lot of instances you can do multiple exercises for each. So there was a little bit of variety, and the total body could be trained, although not perfectly. So this machine was put onto the space station not very long after the initial construction had happened. So in the early 2000s, this machine was in use on the shuttle missions, and also a version was put on the space station. So the astronauts were using it regularly. Its durability was a problem. It tended to break frequently. So again, it was better than nothing, but it was only a step in the right direction. So after several more years of development, there was a new version created which combined a lot of different technologies. And this is just another view. I believe she's doing a deadlift exercise on the original machine. But this is the new machine, and this machine is currently on the International Space Station. It was launched in 2008. So the technologies used, obviously you can see it's a lot more heavy duty. It is motorized, so that helps with the resistance. But here, they use a flywheel technology, similar to what you would see in a rowing machine, just not with air resistance. And here, these are vacuum cylinders. And these work with air pressure, so it's a pneumatic type of resistance. And so they have to build up the pressure in those cylinders. But these two technologies combined make it so that not only do you have more resistance overall, but the resistance feels like you're here on Earth. You feel the weight throughout the full range of motion, and it matches much better the strength curves of your muscles and joints. So this machine is capable of about 36 different exercises, and 18 of those are primary exercises. And what I mean by that is that it's an exercise that you can put a lot of resistance to, and it's really going to stimulate the muscles and bones to maintain or develop. So here's some different photographs of folks using this machine on the space station and doing some different exercises. So the way the machine is set up, the increments, you can do something as light as a 5-pound resistance all the way up to 600 pounds. And so that is more than twice the original machine, as well as you've got more exercise variety and more just overall loading and stimulus to the muscles and bones. So this video is showing one of the astronauts actually using the machine. So he's doing, right here, he's doing a deadlift exercise. Now you see how it looks like he's floating in air while doing this. And that was necessary because if anyone has ever been over in the athletics center downstairs under the weight room when the football team is doing their Olympic lifts, you would think the building is going to come down on your head. And so having vibrations like that in space on the space station wasn't the best idea. So the engineers had to work to figure out how to mount the machine. Here he's doing a squat. How to mount the machine so it would really be floating independently and those vibrations wouldn't affect the orbit or any other thing on the space station, any other functioning, because there's a lot of very sensitive equipment there and experiments and electronics and everything. Okay. So a little bit about their training. So I think that NASA, with working together with physiologists, with engineers, I think they feel like they've got it pretty well right in terms of the machine. So right now there's not additional development that's going on with that machine. So really the focus became, what do you do with the training? So astronauts are often scheduled for missions 2 and 3 years away from when they actually go up in some kind of space mission. So they start training, their pre-flight training, their physical training, about 2 years before they ever go into space. So this is just a table that, of common exercises that they are doing. And what I did was I highlighted some of these in red that give you the most capability of loading. And these are going to be the most effective with improving muscle and bone density. So you can see that they incorporate different movements, triple extension movements. Just think of what you do when you jump. So you extend the hips, knees, and ankles. Other movements are pushing movements, pulling movements, combination movements. So the astronauts utilize all of these and try to get in the peak physical condition before they ever leave the ground. And another aspect of pre-flight training is you have to address different training emphasis areas. So if you can see this, they start with building muscle, so hypertrophy. And they do that with some moderate weight and moderate repetitions. Then they work on their strength development. And that's when you're starting to increase that load. And you drop back the repetitions. And then you peak your strength and start to work on your power. So again, you do fewer repetitions, but every time you're increasing that weight. And then peaking power, there's different ways to do this, but it can be light, it can be heavy. It's all about performing a movement fast. And then they also work on their muscle endurance. That's important too. So that's where you have higher repetitions, but the weight is less. So this is repeated over the 2-year period. So they cycle through these different plans, and it helps the body to not only develop, but then you start over and you're at a higher level. And then you get that recovery. So this is the in-flight training. So without having the other table in front of you, these are some of the same exercises that were on that initial table. So you can see there's a variety. There's upper body, there's lower body. There's exercises that are performed with a lot of weight, exercises that are performed with a little bit of weight, but they cycle through these. So you can see these are labeled routine A, B, and C, and that's important for the next slide. So you can see here's the A and the B and the C. I think my pointer's dying. And you can see they rotate those. They also rotate, so they're rotating exercises, they're rotating intensity. And if you look across the top, you see that they're training 6 days a week. Now, for most of us, that might seem a little odd. You know, the recommendations out there are 3 days a week. But the astronauts want to train that often. And sometimes they'll even train a 7th day. They want to do this work. And it's been successful. So the reports are that they want to be in this machine because it feels like they're back on Earth. Because if you think about it, and their workouts are about 2.5 hours long. So an hour and a half of resistance training and an hour of the aerobic training that we initially saw, the treadmills, the cycloergometers. But they do it because they feel like they're back on Earth, because the other 1.5 hours, 22 hours a day, they're floating around. And it's a very uncomfortable feeling. Even though they train for it, it's still uncomfortable. So they really do want to do this. And they have shown good results, which is excellent. Because if we ever hope to go to Mars, if we ever hope to go back to the moon and establish a colony, these are things that NASA has proposed. We have to make sure that we don't have these muscle and bone losses. We have to address this and make sure that people are not losing the function. And so the astronauts themselves, they have said that they maintain their strength, they maintain their bone density. And with their training, they're training every day, and every month they send these results back to NASA, and they're making adjustments. And then one thing we didn't talk about today is the nutrition side of it. And so none of these things are possible without addressing nutrition. And so nutrition is monitored, the diets are carefully planned, and so that's another reason for the success of this program. It's not just the machine, it's not just the training. And so, but they have seen excellent results, and so this has been a great step in the right direction. And so from my perspective, I feel like first of all, very fortunate to have even been involved with any of this. But secondly, it's been really good to see the interdisciplinary cooperation between engineering and physics and physiology and biomechanics and trainers, even the practitioners that work with these astronauts on the day-to-day basis. So that's been what I've taken away from it, but also just the whole concept of overcoming challenges, because you know, at the onset when we first were working on that very first version of the machine, it just seemed impossible. It seemed like we would never be able to develop anything that would work. And to see it come this far and to see that they're actually making these folks maintain their function, it's been really great. So I guess that's my takeaway message, is overcoming and just to keep reaching and to work together with other people. So thank you.